So the first point that I want to address is do not multitask. This means that you have to be present in the moment and not just by putting whatever's on your hand away, like putting your phone away. Of course, the making eye contact is important, but I hope that by not multitasking, it means that you are eliminating the distractions in your head first. And when you are conversing with someone, don't be half-hearted about it. If you want to get out of the conversation or you're not in a good mood today, rather you just put it nicely to your friend or someone. If you're at work, that's different. So put it nicely to someone and tell them that you're not feeling well today or you're occupied at the moment. Is it okay if you come back to him or her later? So do not multitask. And the key takeaway from this point is to eliminate the distractions in your head first. The second point is when you're speaking, don't make it preachy or sound like a lecture. Because remember that in a conversation, it's always two ways. Sometimes you're taking the role of a listener, and sometimes you're the speaker. And as a speaker, you want to state your opinion and be heard without an opportunity for your listener to respond or argue with you for growth. So if you're just going to speak without people giving you input for feedback, right? And that's your intent, I would suggest you go and write a blog post or a journal or be a typical millennial to take it onto social media and read through the comment section and then reply to them individually instead of actually conversing in a verbal conversation exchange. So as a person that's the listener, you always need to alter your mentality to enter every conversation, assuming that you have something to learn from. There's this, when I was researching, I read this quote from a famous therapist called M. Scott Peck. And he said that listening requires setting aside of oneself. And sometimes that means setting aside your own personal opinion. So it's always like you have to humble yourself and don't presume that you are a know-it-all. So always assume that you have something to learn. And Bill Nye also once said that everyone you will ever meet knows something that you don't. So in other words, it means that everyone is an expert in something. So for example, this is a personal experience. I mentioned I worked as a customer service associate before. So I learned a thing or two about people's frustrations and their point of contact with the online system that I don't get to experience. So you have to put yourself in their shoes and take in their feedback from their experience. So this also helps you to become a better problem solver in some of the circumstances. And in listening actively to them, right, you'll be able to better prompt the person and help him or her navigate the function he or she wants to perform. This also applies the same way to friends. When you're talking to them, don't sound like you're preaching or know-it-all. And then the third point is to go with the flow. It's quite aligned with the previous points that I've already mentioned. So thoughts will come into your mind and you need to let them go out of your mind, because it's very random that sometimes when your friend brings up a topic, you would feel like a train of thought comes into your head or that you relate to that experience. So we've also often heard on interviews or talk shows, right, where a guest is talking for several minutes and then the host comes in to ask some question which seems like the guest has already mentioned before. And then out of nowhere, he suddenly puts in a question that's super irrelevant. Or maybe it's already been answered. But then again, it might be that the talk show host was paid to follow a certain script. It could also mean that the host probably stopped listening 2 minutes ago because he or she thought of this random question and was just going to shoot it anyways without actually listening to the guest actively. So, I mean, he's a talk show host and not a professional counselor or listener, and that's why he follows a script or may not actively listen to the person. But it's also normal that we as human beings do the same thing. Sometimes also very good. We're just sitting there having a conversation with a friend, then we remember that one time we met maybe Tom Hiddleston in a coffee shop. Do be random like that. And then, I mean, if you're casual with a friend, the topics go elsewhere. And but more importantly, I guess it also depends on the circumstances. If your friend is feeling sad or overwhelmed with something, and then suddenly you just have a train of thought that you met Tom Hiddleston in a coffee shop and you bring it up. It's a bit like you're lacking that social awareness. So, and then we stop listening to that friend when this random train of thought happens, right? You need to let this random train of thoughts go and just for the moment and listen to your friend. This one is adopt some open-ended questions. If I'm going too fast, please stop and let me know or drop it in the library chat. I'll read them. So adopting open-ended questions means that it's like back in primary school where you ask questions related to 5W1H: who, what, when, why, where, and how. This actually comes to in line with my point number 2 of don't preach or lecture. So whenever my caller who is calling in for help is encountering some problems, conversations can often be misunderstood and unclear. So we have to prompt them further by asking open-ended questions and let them describe it. They're the ones that know best. And even on a casual basis, if your friend shared with you he or she did bump into Tom Hiddleston in the coffee shop, ask for their experience, like what was that like? How did you feel when you shake their hand or took a selfie? Because then they might have to stop for that moment and think about it. And you're going to get a much more interesting response to keep it going so that, the conversation becomes more meaningful. If you don't know, say that you don't know. This is actually more in line with honesty, humility, and a virtue. So I'll give an example. Say people on national TV or like politicians in parliament, right? They are much more aware that they are going to go on the record, meaning that they are being broadcast live or the next day they will be appearing on the news for whatever they said in that conference. It's constantly being reported in the media. So they're very careful, and you have to take accountability for your words, regardless of whether you're saying it at a job or with your friends. So your words have to be the truth. So regardless of anything, your talk should not be cheap. And honesty and humility is a virtue. Number 6, don't equate other people's experience to yours or yours with theirs. I don't know which way, but I'll elaborate. So if, for example, your friend is talking about the trouble that they're having at work, in school, or exam stress, or how much they really hate their job or someone who have vexed them, right? Don't start interrupting and talk about the time that you felt the same. Like, oh my God, it's so relatable. I've been there. You're going to get through this. Rather, just listen to them first. All experiences are individual. And more importantly, in this context, it is not always about you. Don't start talking about your experience in relates to theirs. Like bringing up what you've went through to put in their scenario, because like I said, all experiences are individual. You don't need to take that moment to prove how amazing you are or how much experiences you have went through. This can, you don't need to bring up how much you have suffered before, because this can oftentimes be seen as a double-edged sword, if you get what I mean. It's like you are at the same time invalidating your friend sharing experience with you, or at the same time what you have said about you having went through the same can also be comforting and assuring to your friend. So think in this sense that conversations are not a promotional opportunity for you, but really listen to your speaker first before you talk. And next is try not to repeat yourself, because it's very condescending and boring, and sometimes you do it subtly. I'm quite sure that in my previous few points I probably did it as well, but we're only human and we do it a lot. So I'm guilty of that. Especially work conversations or frustrations in our daily lives, we'll just end up talking and talking about it over and over again with our friends. So refrain from doing that if you want to engage in a meaningful conversation with your friend, because they would probably be hearing this thing that you are going through for countless and countless of days or even months. So to put yourself in a meaningful conversation and not always about that same issue that revolves around the same thing, try not to repeat yourself, and from whatever your friend has advised you, take it, accept it, process it, and reflect. Is stay out of all the irrelevant details. And by irrelevant details, I mean like, people honestly, people don't really care about the years, the dates, or the names of whoever you went through a certain shit phase with. We don't care who your boss name is and whatsoever, unless you're a history professor or prophet giving a revelation of the future. Then maybe we want to take notes about when a certain thing is going to happen or when the world is going to end, things like that. So honestly, what they care about is you, especially your friends or your family. So they care about what you're like and what you have in common. So please drop the details of the years, the dates, and the names. Okay, number 9 is what I think is the most important, but it's not the last, but it's coming to the end soon. So you have your opinions and point of view. I think it's very, very quite similar to point number 7 and number 6. In fact, all of it. I think number 9 is the most important. So you have your opinions, but you need to let it go or hold it back first. But don't put it on your mind so that as your friend is talking, you just have to listen. You don't keep thinking about the question you want to ask your friend immediately. So back to point 1, be present in that moment. And the question we always like to ask is, as social science students in our class, please always ask, like, why do we not listen to each other enough? Why do politicians not listen to each other enough? And they'd rather talk without much actions. And because in parliament, especially when they're talking, or on a daily life basis when we're talking, right, we feel like we're the ones in control. And control, I don't have to hear anything I'm not interested in. I'm the center of attention. I can bolster my own identity. Go write a blog or be a social media influencer if that's what you want. So it's basically all talk and no action. So if you do watch National Parliament sometimes, it's common to spot these patterns. And most of us are guilty of not listening with the intent to understand, but rather we listen with the intent to reply with what is already on our mind and what we stand for. So we get really distracted, and therefore we are not very good listeners we're just not very good listeners in general. We have to slowly build up our listening skills and be patient to listen to one another, or sometimes even just sit down with yourself to reflect. It takes effort and energy to really pay attention to someone, but you can't do that, then you are really not in a conversation. You're just there by yourself, and you're just talking to yourself in a mirror, basically. Therefore, it's always important to listen, to have a good conversation, or to build friendships with friends. Then we're moving on to the last point of being brief. So actually, being brief simply just means that you have to be interested in people and don't judge them, and assume that everyone has something hidden that's amazing about them. So in my personal opinion, I think it's also makes us as individuals become a better person. We have to always keep our minds open and be prepared to be amazed in the conversation or what you learn about the person sharing, be it their day, their life, what they like to eat, what's their favorite color, small details like this, or it goes with the flow, like I said. So if you keep an open mind, I think you'll never be disappointed. And this builds empathy in individuals too, and it lets go of your pride. And I think it's really wholesome. By really speaking out loud in my room. with that, I just come to the end of my study stream. All of this will actually be uploaded in more elaborated points because I did these slides in the last 10 minutes. And lastly, if you find these study streams or our server's environment being wholesome, the best way you can show your support is through a donation to the COVID-19 Emergency Fund for United World School. Let me just change my window. Can you see it?